Joe was very small for a Tyrannosaurus rex, though he did not know that himself. To him, everything else simply felt big. The trees towered like giants above his head, their leaves whispering secrets in the warm wind. Ferns brushed against his sides as he walked, and insects buzzed and glittered like tiny living sparks in the air. His feet were heavy, even though he was still young, and every step pressed deep footprints into the soft earth. Sometimes he stumbled over his own claws, and sometimes his long tail knocked over rocks or snapped branches, but Joe always picked himself back up again. Joe was curious about everything. He liked the way mud squished between his toes near the riverbanks, and how the water reflected the sky in shaking fragments of blue and gold. He liked the feel of sunlight warming his scales in the mornings and the cool shadow of the jungle in the afternoons. What he did not like was the quiet that settled in his chest when night came. When the moon rose, pale and watchful, Joe curled himself into a small hollow in the ground, wrapping his tail around his body the way instinct told him to. He listened to the sounds of the wild, chirps, calls, distant roars, but none of them answered the ache inside him. Somewhere deep in his memory were feelings of safety and closeness, of standing beside something enormous and protective. He remembered a heartbeat, slow and steady, and a voice that rumbled like thunder but felt gentle at the same time. Yet every time he tried to hold on to those memories, they faded like mist. Joe was alone. One morning, as the sun burned away the fog, Joe heard something new. It didn't sound like the calls of dinosaurs or the rustle of animals moving through undergrowth. It sounded sharp and strange, metal clanging, engines whining, voices rising and falling too quickly to be roars. Joe lifted his head and tilted it to one side, trying to understand. His curiosity fluttered stronger than his fear. Carefully, Joe followed the sounds. The jungle slowly thinned until the trees opened into a wide clearing that smelled nothing like the wild. The ground was flattened and packed down, and tall metal fences cut across the land in hard, straight lines. Behind those fences were dinosaurs, some Joe recognized, others he had never seen before. They moved slowly, or paced in circles, or stood still with tired eyes. Outside the fences walked strange two-legged creatures wearing bright colors and carrying tools that glittered in the sunlight. Joe stepped forward, his heart pounding hard against his ribs. Confusion rushed through him. Why were the dinosaurs trapped? Why did the land feel so wrong? A branch cracked loudly beneath Joe's foot. Everything froze. One of the humans turned, staring straight at him. Their eyes widened, and their mouth opened as if to shout. Within moments, the clearing erupted with movement. Humans ran, gates clattered, machines hummed. Joe backed away, fear rushing over him like a wave. But before he could turn and run, something sharp stung his side. His legs wobbled. His vision blurred. The world tilted. Joe tried to roar, tried to call for help, but his sound came out weak and frightened. The ground rushed up to meet him, and darkness closed around his thoughts. When Joe woke, his head ached and his body felt heavy and slow. He pushed himself up and hit his skull against cold metal with a loud clang. Startled and frightened, Joe scrambled backward, claws scraping helplessly against the hard surface. Metal bars surrounded him, stretching high above his head. The air smelled clean and sharp, not rich and alive like the jungle. Joe was trapped. Outside the enclosure, humans watched quietly. Some spoke softly, others wrote notes. They brought food and water and left them behind thick barriers. Joe ate when hunger forced him to, but his heart stayed tight and uneasy. He paced the fence endlessly, sniffing for familiar scents that weren't there. At night, artificial lights glowed where stars should have been, and Joe cried out in low, lonely sounds that echoed unanswered. Days blurred together. Joe grew restless and afraid, his small body filled with energy that had nowhere to go. He pressed his nose against the fence often, staring beyond it at the distant trees. Freedom was right there, so close. Then the storm came. Rain slammed down from the sky in heavy sheets, soaking the ground and rattling the metal structures. Thunder roared louder than any dinosaur, shaking the earth itself. Bright flashes split the sky, and alarms began to howl. Humans ran for shelter, shouting over the noise. Joe crouched low, shaking as thunder boomed again. Suddenly, there was a sharp crack and a sizzling sound. A section of the fence went dark. The hum Joe had grown used to vanished. Joe lifted his head slowly. He stepped closer and nudged the fence with his snout. It bent. Heart racing, Joe shoved again, harder this time, and the metal gave way just enough. Without thinking, driven by instinct and desperation, Joe ran. He burst through the broken fence, scraping his side but not caring. Rain washed over him as he sprinted toward the jungle, trees breaking under his strength. Humans shouted behind him, but their voices faded quickly. The wild swallowed Joe whole. Branches snapped, mud splashed, and Joe ran until his lungs burned and his legs trembled. When he finally stopped, he stood waist-deep in ferns, rain dripping from his scales, breathing hard but free. Days passed as Joe wandered farther than he ever had before. He explored mountains, valleys, and wide plains where herds moved together in slow, gentle rhythms. He watched families stay close, adults forming protective circles around their young. Each time he saw this, something inside Joe ached. One evening, as the sky turned orange and purple, Joe heard it. A roar. It was deep and powerful, sending vibrations through the ground. It wasn't aggressive. It was searching. Joe's breath caught. Without thinking, he answered. His roar was smaller, high, and shaky, but it carried. There was silence. Then trees crashed aside. The earth trembled as two enormous Tyrannosaurus rexes emerged from the jungle. Joe froze, fear and hope tangling together in his chest. One of them stepped closer, lowering her massive head. She sniffed him gently, carefully. Joe squeaked. The larger rex rumbled softly, brushing her snout against his side. Warmth flooded Joe's body, the memory locked into place. The heartbeat, the shadow, the voice. Joe wasn't lost. He had been searching. That night, Joe curled safely between his parents, stars shining bright above them. The wild sounds of the jungle wrapped around him like a lullaby. For the first time in a long while, Joe felt whole. His adventure had led him back to where he belonged. And as sleep claimed him, Joe dreamed not of cages or fear, but of family, the wild, and the long life waiting ahead.